So we all know that cars are one of the main transportation that humans use to get around the world to places where they want to go, but nobody really understands how the engine works. So in my presentation, I'm going to explain how the engine works. So to start off, I'm going to be talking about an internal combustion engine, which means that the explosion that causes the engine to run happens within the engine block. And as you can see here, this is the combustion chamber where the explosion happens. And there's a few parts that are in it. So there's two valves, one opens, lets stuff in, one also opens and lets stuff out. You got a piston in the middle, that big circular thing, which moves up and down, which is connected to a camshaft rod at the bottom. And when it goes up and down, it moves that rod on the bottom in a circular motion. And it has a counterweight, which helps move the piston up and down, and a spark plug up in the top middle. So what happens is the first valve opens in this process. On the right side, as you can see, it opens and lets in air-fuel mixture. And while this is let in, the valve closes, and all that comes in and pushes the piston down. And while it gets pushed down, it moves the camshaft at the bottom, and the counterweight pushes the piston back up. And as it pushes back up, the air-fuel ratio mixture gets compressed and makes contact with the spark plug. And the spark plug causes the explosion between that air-fuel ratio. And while that explosion happens, it shoots the piston back down, and it continues to move that camshaft. And once it goes back down again, it comes back up, and the second valve opens up and lets out all the gases that were caused by the explosion, which is called the exhaust. And it goes through your exhaust out the muffler at the end of your car. And so as this continuously happens, it won't stop until you turn off the car. And so this continuously goes and moves that camshaft in that circular motion. And while that happens, as you can see right here, the camshaft is right here, and it moves that flywheel at the end that's connected to it. And that flywheel is connected to the transmission of the car, and that transmission is ultimately connected to the axles, which turns your motor. So that circular motion runs throughout the engine to the transmission to the axle and moves the tires. And so all this happens, and the explosion gets super hot, and the engine has to run at an optimal temperature. So that's when the cooling system comes into play. And this is the cooling system. So what happens is you have antifreeze and a radiator, and the antifreeze is inside the radiator. And once the engine starts, the antifreeze runs through the tube, the bottom tube, and goes through the engine port of the engine, and runs through the bottom of the engine all the way to the top of the engine. And once it reaches the top of the engine, it is hot, and so it needs to get recycled back through the engine. And so what it does, it goes through the radiator and goes through all the ports in the radiator, and the antifreeze gets cooled off by the constant air that comes from outside of the car while you drive, and the radiator fan, which is located behind it. And these two things work together to cool off the antifreeze, which can then recycle the antifreeze back through the system that has, and this keeps the engine at an optimal temperature to run and not get super hot. And with all these components working together, this is what makes an engine work for us humans to get to places to go.